Now we're both stuck in this hole. And his buddy goes, yeah, but I've been down here before and I know the way out. And I started to realize that I spent a lot of my life trying to avoid falling into the hole, judging myself when I got down there, and that maybe all of our lives are better defined by how often we jump into one, and how lucky we are that everything that we learned while we were down there, we can use to get somebody else we care about or we've never met out.
It feels good, man. It feels good, right? Yo, I'm in the light at the end of the tunnel. Paper stacks, yeah, I got them in the bundles. Harry Potter breaking bread with the muggles. They said I wouldn't make it. Now they looking puzzled.
Drew, you ready?
Bring it.
All right, Ty, you ready?
Let's go. Oh, Lord almighty.
Timeout. Tyler, who are we taking a timeout with today?
Well, Kev, good to see you, brother. And man, my ball wasn't ringing in that whistle. That was a little high octave there. But ladies and gentlemen, from Canada to right across the pond in Rochester, where Kevin is, down here to the DFW, we have the Drew Dudley. Drew is an author of Day One Leadership. And a little backstory on Drew, guys, is I was at the same table as this gentleman at a chamber event, I believe, in Richardson, Texas, and I didn't even know he was the speaker that was about to go up and speak. And this guy just blew the house down with just a different way of leadership that I've ever really heard. And Drew, thanks for being on the show, man. And I guess I just wanted to fire off, Drew. So I was sitting at the table with you, not knowing that you were the speaker, but I somehow saw that you were getting prepared for something, man. You were like stroking your beard like in a certain way, and you were like getting prepped, dude. Can you tell me what was going through your head before you took the stage to just blow dynamite up in that place?
Honestly, man, I think I always go back to, first of all, thank you. That was like really kind of you. Honestly, man, here's what was going through my head is that a long time ago, when I was just getting into speaking, I got to sit in a green room with a guy who'd been doing it for like 12 years, right? And at that point, I look up at the idea of this being your job, to go around and speak to audiences about ideas you believed in. The thought of getting to do that for a decade, because I'd been only doing it for about a year and was still waiting for someone to tap me on the shoulder and be like, yeah, no, you don't get to do this anymore. This is too awesome. And so I said, man, I feel bad because I've been doing it for a year and I still get nervous. And he said, why do you feel bad about that, man? And I said, well, like it's not great to feel nervous. So you're a little rough off the top. And I said, I just want to get rid of these butterflies. And I'm sure it comes with experience. He goes, dude, that doesn't come with experience. Like that comes when you're ready to retire. He said, man, here's the thing that I want to tell you for the rest of your life. Anytime you're feeling nervous and you're judging yourself about it, because honestly, guys, it is not our emotions that screw us up. It's our judgments of ourselves about our emotions. Like, oh my God, I'm sad or I'm happy or I'm not sad enough or I'm not happy enough. And he said, dude, you never want the butterflies to go away. You just want them to learn how to fly in formation. And he said, nervousness is your brain, your body's way of reminding your brain what you are about to do is important. And so he said, that is what you want. You want them to be there because it means that you still care about the lives of the people in the audience. Because time is one thing that people can't get back. I didn't really get what he was saying, but now these are my words, is that time is something that nobody can get back. And when they give you their time, there is an obligation for you to take it seriously. That doesn't mean there's an obligation for you to blow them away, because you don't always have control of that, but you have an obligation to take seriously the fact that they won't get back the time they spend listening to you. And you better be prepared, and you better not be hungover, and you better, like not be thinking about the next thing down the road. So that's what was going through my head, is like, let's get the butterflies in order. Let's get the butterflies in order. The other thing too, is it was my last presentation for about 6 weeks. And so what was going through my head, honestly, is I was looking back on another year where I was getting the chance to do something I loved and was excited about taking a little downtime and sort of reminding myself that this is it for the year. So you don't have to hold anything back. You don't have to have energy for tomorrow's speech. You don't have to like hop tonight and then be in California. It was just like, this is it, man. Like, drop it, go have some Texas barbecue and go. So that's what was in my mind, is just thinking. And the problem with getting to know people, like sitting at the table ahead of time, is that now like they are real people. It's one thing when it's an audience full of faces and they're people, but when you're joking with them, when you like them instantly, now there's even more pressure to not bore them, to not have them be like, my time would have been better spent. That's the key, is that they can disagree with me. They can not like me. They can do whatever. But I just don't want people thinking my time was wasted. Because even if, I make you disagree with me, you still have ideas you didn't have before I opened my mouth. And so to me, that's just what I was thinking, man, is that I don't want to let this audience down because like this is all I'm good at. I can't give them anything else. So they're going to give me an hour, bring it. So that's what was going through my head, man. It's a long answer, I know. I also don't know when we're going to air or... Yeah, I don't know when you're going to air this either. So, like right now, it's early May if anybody's listening, and so maybe you won't air it when they find out I'm Canadian, because like who knows in 5 weeks. But just so y'all know, we come in peace.
That's too funny.
I came off vacation. I'm like, what happened in the world? And they're like, Canadians were rude. I'm like, what do you mean we were rude? And they're like, you guys were just rude. You were mean. I'm like, what has happened in the world that Canadians are rude? So it's been an interesting time to emerge from like a 9-week news embargo and just be like, who's mad at us? Okay.
Yeah, it was short-lived. That's for sure. But that was an awesome story to hear, just how you get prepared. And we were talking before we got on the show of some of the hobbies that you have. Drew, I mean, you wrote a 272-page book called This Is Day One. How the hell did you have enough content in between your ears to write a 272-page book?
Well, a couple of things. One, you take 12 years to write it. That helps a lot. Also, I wrote a 440-page book, and my editor laughed his ass off and said, no, this is a 270-page book. So it was really smart people. Look, man, I mentioned ahead beforehand that, especially since my last bout with COVID, I've developed these long COVID symptoms, that the easiest way to describe them is severe ADHD. And so trust me, there is no shortage of stuff kicking around in my head. The amount of it that's worth other people spending their time thinking about is smaller. I wrote the book ultimately because as you do this job, you get an hour over and over and over again. You get an hour of people's time. But as you work and you speak and you learn the stories and meet brilliant people, like the amount of stuff that you have to share keeps getting bigger, but the period you have to share it doesn't. It's still an hour. And so what happened is I think I got to a point in my life where I felt as if I was ready to create an entire new sort of chapter of content, but I didn't want to lose all the stuff that had come before. And so I just sat down and said, imagine you were able to take the stage and could put everything that you've ever put into a speech out there, and then you get to move on. That's how the book was written. And I wrote the book, sat down, finally did it. And I actually did it over 18 days. I had an extraordinarily emotional thing happen to me. And the best stuff that you create is when you are really close to broken. Sometimes when you're broken, you're not creating your best. Afterwards, sometimes not, but like right beforehand, when you're like just cracking open emotionally is when some of the best stuff comes out. And so for me, I finally sat down and in 18 days wrote everything that went in this book. Then I put it in a drawer for 2 years. And I remember, because I tell this story, I like telling stories that happen to me because I can remember them easily, but I always want them to be about the people listening. So the lesson I want to teach in this story is that I came home one day and my girlfriend was lying on the couch reading this red binder. And I'm like, what is that? Like, it's a binder. What is she reading? And then I realized, oh, that's the book. And I guess she'd gone looking through the drawers for a pen or something and pulled this thing out and looked up at me and said, why is this in the drawer? And I did the thing that we all do is like, well, I wrote it and I'm not sure if it's any good. And like 2 weeks later, we were away on New Year's. And I asked her, like, what do you want to be true a year from today? I've never liked resolutions, but I do like thinking, what do we want the outcome to be? Mm-hmm. And then you say, okay, well, what are the things I need to do every day this year to make that more likely at the end of the year? It's not a resolution of what to do. It's an identification of what the end goal is. And then you work back from there. So I asked her, what do you want to be true? And she said, I want to know that you tried to get the book published. It doesn't have to, but I want to know you tried. So I said, sure. And then in a whole other story, she passed away 8 days later. And so now I'm stuck because I've made that commitment and now I can't replace it with a trip to Hawaii or something. Like, I didn't make that happen, but I'll do this. And that was it. So my message to people is that when people you care about are hiding what they want to put into the world, whatever their art is, their speech, their poetry, their photography, their skill at some other thing they don't want to do because they don't want to walk away from a good salary with what they don't really love, push a little bit. I don't have that book out there in the world if somebody that I loved didn't make me commit to putting my art, for lack of a better term, out in the world. So that's how it started. Like, the book took 18 days to write and 2.5 years to edit. Yeah. So like your first draft, the thing about life is that we don't get to do the revisions. With the book, I got to whittle away the bad parts until just the good was there. So the book comes out and you're like, how do you know this stuff? I'm like, well, you should have seen all the stuff I didn't know that we had to pull out before we got to these few nuggets that were at the end. Yeah. So I just say that to remind everyone that so many of the things that I've done, from the book to the TED Talk that led to the book, other people pushed me into it. The TED Talk that I ended up doing, the TEDx talk that ended up on TED, my students pushed me to do that. And I refused to do it when they suggested I do it. I was too scared. I didn't tell them that. I just told them I'm just a part-time speaker. And I'd always told my students, you can't say you're just anything. I won't stand for it. I don't let people who I know are people of worth diminish themselves in front of me. And then you try to do it in front of them and it's game over. Like, they were all over that. So they used this new thing called Facebook that I wasn't on, to create a group, back and write on walls, to try to get me to nominate it for this event. And they did it without my knowledge. I got a call inviting me to do it on the day I quit my job. I was sitting in my apartment with boxes all around me, and I got a call saying, you want to give this speech? And everything went from there. The book, the speech. When you go back to the most significant parts of my life, it was always people who believed in me more than me that pushed me. So if you're listening and you know that person who just hasn't cut the album or tried to put that poetry out in the world or start the blog or whatever, just tell them that you'll be disappointed in them if they don't, and manipulate them into doing what's best for them. Wow, that's some great leadership advice there, Drew. Yeah,
and Drew, I got to ask, man, like, what was the dang feeling like when, like, I mean, in part, excuse me if I'm wrong on this number, but what did you think what do you think resonated most with 6.7 million people? And sorry if I undercut you on that number, but I was looking at the views last night, and I don't know, it's in the millions, man, that watched you. What do you think resonated with them so much that just caught fire and spread by the millions? Because that doesn't happen to just everybody, Drew Dudley.
Well, one thing is, when you and I met, I'm sure this will come up later, is that I'm in recovery from alcohol addiction. And one of the things that you learn, like, step one, is there's all kinds of things in this world over which you have no control. I could recite the musical Hamilton for you from beginning to end. And one of the things that really resonates with me is that, let me tell you what I wish I'd known when I was young and dreamed of glory. You have no control who lives, who dies, and who tells your story. And to realize, I think the video is an excellent example of, you have so little control as a speaker, as someone who puts ideas in the world, what's going to catch and how. I think, and honestly, man, why so many people watch the video is because it's short. Like, if I had 12 minutes to do that story, I don't think it has half the views. It's 6.5 minutes long. It's actually 8 minutes and 22 seconds long, but I managed to deliver it out of fear in 6 minutes and 33. I don't like that video. As a professional speaker, the videos, like the presentation's very poor. I was so scared that I speak at about 1.5 times the speed. I don't take a breath. I have friends who teach ESL who use that video as their final assignment. If you can comprehend my TEDx talk on lollipops, you are seen as someone who is fluent in spoken English. So you know why it resonated? It was short, and it took an idea that everyone already knows, and it wrapped it in Velcro. And it created an intellectual shorthand for an idea that I think people agree with and find important, but it's hard to explain. And it's flippant when you say everyone is a leader. And people sort of go, eh. But when you take an idea that everyone recognizes is valuable and you create a way that it sticks with them, you give it a different name. That's all that happened. Is I took a concept, which is, when you impact other people in an individual moment positively, that's a good thing. And it has a much bigger impact than you think. And because that is a form of leadership and power that we all have, what you've actually got in the belief that leadership exists in these individual, quote unquote, lollipop moments or individual moments of impact for people not familiar with the concept, what you say is that this is a power everyone has. And it's the only power on earth that's accessible to everyone on earth. Like every other form of power has systemic barriers between that power and most of the people on the planet. Even if the American education system is trying to do everything they can to remove that acknowledgement from the world, that there are systemic barriers between leadership and between most power and most people on the planet. Mm-hmm. The ability to create moments of impact is accessible to everyone. It is the only truly equitable power out there. And that, I think, is an idea that people like. It is more nuanced than everyone is a leader. It is about acknowledging power that we often ignore within our own self and within our own impact. And I think people like that because the message is that you matter more than you probably think, but please think about it. That's all it is that I created an intellectual shorthand for an idea that people liked and an idea that made them feel better about themselves. You wrap it up in Velcro, you make it bite-sized, and you put it out there into the world. And in 2010, you could still get 6.5 minutes of attention. Now, I'm not really sure if it would still catch. But you know what, man? It's not me. It's not that it was brilliant. It's not that it was well delivered. It was that it was short and it was a story. And the story is the basic unit of human understanding. And that's why it went. That's it. A lot of different people have given better stories. They've given more professional and polished TED Talks. One thing you learn as a speaker is that like 60% of how people react to your presentation, you have no power over it. All you can do is bring your butterflies and try really, really hard. And some days I'll trip over myself and sound like an idiot and get a standing ovation. And other days I'm halfway through being like, dude, you are in the zone today. Like you are at your best at what you do right now. And I feel good about that. And then at the end you get, solid but polite applause. And it was when lunch was, or how warm the room is, or what kind of emails they had this morning, or how good the rest of the conference has been. At first, it was like my job always to blow everybody away. And now it's like, no, it's your job to bring the best you have and start to recognize that everything outside of your control is outside of your control. And that's honestly what like being on stage is like, just doing a weird dance and hoping that people like the song that day.
Yeah, I think a whole lot of things. You said a whole lot of that I want to kind of go back to and reiterate because I think we're all on our own journey. But to your point, Drew, I do think you're not interested in that journey as much until you do hit rock bottom. I had to go through that cycle a couple of times to then start to realize, wait a minute, I'm living somebody else's blueprint that I don't really fully want or understand. And how did I get here? So to your point, that I think some of our best learning is when there is pain, right? There is uncertainty, which kind of runs counterculture to humanity's desire of homeostasis, right? You mentioned working backwards. That's something that I do in consulting. I do. Tyler has heard me say it all the time. Start with the end in mind, and work your way backwards in order to achieve that goal or that result. All that is forming a hypothesis, right? And having a hypothesis and going to test that theory. No different here. Hearing you kind of say, now this is not the path that I would have chosen, right, to get to this point, to go and speak and motivate millions of people through a YouTube video. How much work have you had to do on yourself? Because you used a big word for me earlier, worth their time. And then I heard later on you start to lean into, I had to limit my expectations of proving myself. Is it proving? Is it performing? Is it perfecting? Right? Those are my big P's. And I didn't feel too worthy until I started to love myself and accept myself and truly trust myself to then feel like okay, I can simply just do this with enthusiasm, do this with excitement, and really put my best version of myself forward and ultimately not care about the judgments or the expectations of others. And in doing so, I realized how just judgmental I was of others, even though I lied to myself and told myself that I wasn't. So my ego was different than the definition that I had traditionally thought of ego. And that was kind of one of the greatest blessings that I realized was I wanted to give. And I hear something in you that you wanted to give. You wanted to give this great grand performance. How much work did Drew have to do on himself to start to really understand that I am only in control of Drew and I'm not really the driver of my life? I'm kind of in the passenger seat.
Yeah. I mean, you say work did I have to do? And I'm sure a lot of people know, I know what he's going to say here, but like, it's very much ongoing and it's always a different construction project. And then you're always wondering if maybe the last renovation wasn't such a great one. So it's very much ongoing. I'm trying to figure out how to answer your question without being a 12-minute answer, because it would, like, if you'd asked me that question a year and a half ago, I would have probably talked completely about a different form of work that I was doing. And so that's what's strange, because there's three different things that popped into my mind there. One is about experiences growing up. Two is about mental health and alcohol, the challenges that came through that. And the third one is what's happened to me since COVID about 2 years ago. And I'll start with the first one without doing a 12-minute answer and follow up with anything you'd like me to dive deeper into. And we'll here's the sort of chapter. I went speaking at a conference for high school leadership students, and I don't do that all that often, but I love it when it's like a statewide conference of student leaders. It's awesome. And because they self-identified, they're there, they want to be there, and they're young. It's hard to get people at 17 who want to hear a speech. Like, you can get them with a good speech, but they don't necessarily want to be there. And a billionaire was speaking as part of a panel before me. Amazing guy. He wrote a book called Animals I Want to See. And animals I've seen in the wild, because when he was young and very poor, he made a list of all of the animals he wanted to see in person in his life, figuring that someone who manages to see a rhinoceros in the wild or a giraffe in the wild has lived an amazing life. And when you're living where he was, in a poor part of Ohio, the thought of dreaming about seeing a rhinoceros in person was a motivating thing. And so one of the students got up and asked a question, which was totally fair. He said, what part of your life or personality would you say is most responsible for driving you to become someone who is a billionaire? And this man, and I've heard that question to a lot of really successful people, and he thought for a second, and then he said, I was chasing the love of my father. And that is the worst reason to be a billionaire that you could possibly be. And it was such an honest and self-aware answer. And I immediately started doing presentations where I pointed out to people that there is no mess in your life that you will ever have to clean up bigger than the one left by your parents. And even if your parents were awesome, even if they weren't terrible, they all had things they didn't like about themselves, and they were all self-conscious. And every parent, even the best one in the world, created a mess for their kids with the mess that they had in themselves. And we often don't know what it is. And the way I think he was trying to get across is, you might not be aware of what the mess is. You might have spent your whole life struggling to clean it up. Whatever you're doing with the mess, don't blame yourself for it. And that, to me, and let's not dive too far into it, but that had a big part of my life. My girlfriend once asked me, and you know that tone you use when you tell someone something you know they already know, like, oh, well, maybe this is why. And she said that to me. She's like, is the fact your mother never really gave you the love that moms are supposed to the reason you try so hard with all the women in your life? And there was an old show called How I Met Your Mother, where they had an episode where when people realize things that should have been obvious, there's a breaking glass sound. And that happened to me. I was like, and she also was like, oh my God, did you not realize that? And I'm just like, oh my God, this is like a horrible Freudian moment where I have to go outside and be like, no, I had never actually thought of that. But now that I have, It's like a Tarantino movie. At the end, you're like, oh, I'm going to go back and watch it now that I know what the heck is true. And so that played a big role in overcoming the fact that when you are relentlessly told that there's something wrong with you, like you just believe it. No matter what happens in your life, you just believe it. The work you have to do for alcohol and from recovering from alcohol addiction and realizing that you are powerless over it, to realize how to navigate a life with bipolar disorder, especially in a world of academia and a world where my entire career is based on whether you find my ideas credible. And we still live in a world that equates mental illness with mental weakness. And so how do you navigate that? A lot of work went into that. And also letting go of the blame that says, the alcohol and the bipolar played a huge role in the behaviors that you had, but you still chose those. You didn't overcome them. The challenge is realizing that your brain didn't have the capacity to change your behavior for whatever reason. But you still are the one who took this long to go into rehab. You're still the one who took this long to acknowledge there was a problem, that you'd been manic 3 times and did nothing about it. And that, like, working through that is a big part. And I think a lot of what I do now, you say, my girlfriend gave me the nicest compliment I'd ever been given just this past weekend, when she's like, I've never met anyone who works as hard to be a better man as you do, which was weird to hear because I was in the middle of a rant about injustice in the world. And so that it made me think about, I think, and I'm sure people listening understand this, you do the work on yourself so that you don't dislike yourself, and so that you start to behave as if you deserve good things. Because when you do that, you make the world better for the people around you. Like, when you believe you deserve good things, but not at the expense of other people, your life becomes better because you seek the things and the people that you do deserve, and you don't convince yourself that you don't. That was a lot of work. And the last bit of work that I'm doing right now, this is the new one, is that my last bout with COVID was I had 4, and I had the least severe one. And I thought, oh, well, this is just like a nothing one. You know, the one you get I can't believe it just was positive.
Yeah, positive. Yeah.
And what happens is during the pandemic, I was so cut off from people that I did not realize until we were able to sort of go out into the world that I couldn't remember stuff, and I wouldn't respond to texts, or I'd start an email and then walk away. Or why is there now like 7 half-filled water bottles around my room? And I used to be 15 minutes early for everything, and I was half an hour early a minute ago, but now I'm standing by the door and it's 5 minutes to, what did I do for the last 25 minutes? I didn't understand what was happening. And finally, when I couldn't write speeches anymore, I was doing the same stuff for 2 years, and finally went to a doctor, and, they couldn't tell what it was, but they said, well, all the symptoms are severe ADHD. Like, how long have you had ADHD? And I'm just like, since you said that out loud, apparently. And so to go from not really any symptoms to severe ADHD symptoms was really hard. And I kept saying, when am I going to go back to Drew? Right. I did all of this work to become that guy. Right. Like, I moved through some of the pain I had, and I moved through, finding my girlfriend the morning she passed away, and everything that came out of that on the PTSD side. And I worked so hard at that, and I worked so hard at being sober, and I worked to lose 100 pounds. And now I'm not that guy anymore. And that guy, like, I so worked for him. When do I get back to that guy? And I went to see a friend of mine speak, and she had a traumatic brain injury and had been one of Canada's top 30 under 30 or something, 40 under 40. I know it gets easier the older you get. Now I'm like, eventually I'll be top 120 under 120. Yeah. But she gave a speech about her life became better when she let go of the idea of going back to who she was before the head injury, and started to be more open to exploring who she was with it. Because up until that point, she thought that exploring and changing and adapting to the new reality of someone with a TBI meant she was accepting that, like, she was giving up, that she wasn't trying. And she said, so for 2 years, I resisted becoming a better version of who I could be because I kept being frustrated. I couldn't go back to what I was. And so I started, I hadn't written a new speech because I was afraid I wouldn't be able to. when you can't really read, when you can't execute, when your executive functioning is gone, and when your goal is to speak without saying for 60 minutes, the symptoms I had developed basically flew in the way of doing all of that well. And to realize that to try to do what you've always just naturally been able to be good at, to be afraid to try it because you'll discover you can't. Like, it's hard for people to be like, what do you mean for 2 years you assumed you couldn't do a new speech? You tried, right? Nah, I didn't. Because at least until I try, you don't have to come to grips with it. But then as you've gone a couple of years without anything brand new and you realize that your career is going to be over in a couple of years unless you generate new, I tried. And I tried to do it the way I used to, and I couldn't. And then I remembered her speech and I thought, well, why don't you try it differently, that you've never done it before with the way you are? And my brain was like, but then you're admitting that, like, you can't do it the old way. And then part of my brain went, well, who cares? You can still do it. So I went out and I wrote a new speech and I had to do it totally differently, and it went wonderfully. And so, yeah, the work I've been doing now is to try to not create the Drew that I worked so hard to create before, to use a different strategy to be. And that was 12 minutes, wasn't it? Damn it.
No.
So yeah, those are the three things.
What I wanted to ask is you kind of, I mean, you're talking about some of the things that I think anybody that's developing that self-awareness, right, and trying to figure themselves out it is a journey, right? But you got to be honest with yourself. And I think that was kind of one of my things was, if Tyler used this phrase on one of our past episodes, but if you spot it, you got it, kind of thing.
Oh, right? Nice.
And if you can see it in somebody else, it's probably what you don't like most about yourself, right? If it's the one thing that drives you the most insane. But one of the things that you said, right, and when you gave your three, right, experience growing up, mental health and alcohol addiction, and then the COVID pandemic, is that I've realized more and more people live their life in the rearview mirror. Right. They're almost a prisoner of their past, and they get so obsessive over their story that they ultimately become that story, and because they use it to blame and excuse certain behaviors that they're doing today. Right. And that was me. And while at the same time I had convinced myself that I needed to predict in an attempt to control the future because I couldn't deal with uncertainty.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh man, if I could go back, they like, if you could talk to yourself on your first day of college or your last day of high school, and they're like, what would you tell yourself? Well, in some ways I wouldn't want to tell too much, right? Like, you mess with the future. But I wish I could sit the guy down and be like, you've been taught to learn all these skills. The number one skill you don't have, you have to learn, is you need to be able to learn how to live with uncertainty. Yeah. If you can become better at being okay with not knowing what's going to happen, your life will become easier. Definitely. And to be able to accept uncertainty. And then I couldn't figure out like the key to being able to do that. And then every now and then you get one sentence from one book that like, you're like, boom, there it is. When I read The Alchemist, and I read, if something happens once, it may not happen again. Yeah. If it happens twice, it will happen a third time. I'm like, what a perfect summation. And so what actually, and you just had an example of how my brain has changed. What I tried to do there was tell a second story to reinforce the point I want to go back to. And now I can't remember what the first thing was. What were we talking about before I told the side story there about, I was trying
just becoming almost like, how did you get out of your past, because it ultimately then becomes your story. And then your story is something that most people are unwilling to forgive their past, right? Because they're trying to predict and control their future at the same time. They're never really in the present moment.
I wish, because someone gave me one sentence that wasn't the one I gave you. I gave you an example of what kind of sentence it was instead of just giving you the sentence. It might come back, but it was that idea that, I forget what I was saying before, my friends, and I apologize. And this is the frustrating piece, because as a speaker who does questions like this, you want to offer like, stories are powerful. So there's ways of making an argument, but part of the challenge is, I just tried to do what I used to do, is that in order to tie a complex argument together, you need to remember all of the different pieces and tie them so that what you say can be as useful and easy to follow for the audience. Mm-hmm. If you don't, you get what I just did, which is that you kind of go off in 5 different directions and then you don't actually get to the main key. I heard it recently called the weave as if it was a good thing. No, it's chaotic mess where you don't know what you're talking about. So I'm sorry that I just did the weave for everybody listening and I didn't give you the nice little piece that I could have said. But ultimately, it just comes down to the fact that letting go of the past, like looking forward to the future. Oh, this is what it was. Thank you so much, Brain. When I find it was about coming to grips with uncertainty, and it was just like, it is so much easier to be decisive in life than it is to be certain, because it's possible to be decisive and it's impossible to be certain. And that one phrase, I'm so glad it came back. Let's edit it out so it sounds like I knew exactly what it was and so I don't get death threats. That ultimately, that was what made, now I always think of that. I always think of that phrase. I'm like, be decisive here. You don't have to be certain. Mm-hmm. And one of the keys was, don't try to make decisions that are right. All right. Yep. Don't use, when you make decisions, keep 2 things in mind. Oh God, I'm going to forget one of them. Keep 2 things in mind to make good decisions. One, decisions should do 2 things: generate as many options as possible and generate as much momentum as possible. Mm-hmm. We create plans and then we make decisions to try to adhere to the plan that we created. I found that it's far more effective to come up with desired end results and then make decisions along the way that are designed to generate more options that take you to those results and generate momentum. It is far more important. 5-year momentum is so much more important than 5-year plans in a company, because when you go into that, you recognize we have a desired end state, but things are going to change dramatically over the next whatever amount of time we have. So when we make decisions, not just yourself, but everybody you empower to make decisions, here are the 2 things I want you to do when you make decisions. I want you to ask which one generates the most future options in order to adjust, and, ultimately, like, and how much, which one generates the most momentum in this moment. Momentum is key. Ask a shark. You have to swim forward no matter how slowly. You always have to be moving. And so for me, when you don't know what the future holds, at least you say, okay, well, what will generate the most options and momentum right here? That to me is a key way of dealing with uncertainty. And instead of being like, okay, you're uncertain, what do you do about it? I say, no, this is how I make decisions. And the way that I have designed my decision-making process assumes uncertainty, not is impacted by it. It simply assumes almost every decision I'm going to have to make, I am not going to have enough information to make the right one. So set up your process. Like, look, man, you don't rise to the level of your goals in this world. And people keep like goal. And I get how important goals are, but you don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. And maybe that's someone who goes through a 12-step program and we get that as a result. But like, to stop drinking, to stop, like, to deal with your mental health, whatever the case may be, like, you have to have a process. Like, the day one concept is based on the idea in recovery that you make one decision today to not have a drink, and then you treat every day of the rest of your life as if it's the first day, because it makes it just one decision. It doesn't make it 15 years of decisions. It doesn't say, oh, you can't make it because think of all those times you failed to. It just says, I need one thing out of you today, man. Make this decision. And tomorrow you don't have to. Tomorrow have your pizza. Tomorrow don't take your meds. Tomorrow have your drink. But today, just make the decision, okay? And then I wake up the next day and I act like, okay, well, you got to be able to do it at least once, right? Just do it once. And then the next day, yeah, you got to be able to do it once, right? Just do it once. And that's it. That's a process. That is a mental process. If my goal is to never drink again for the rest of my life, I will not reach that goal. If my process is to make a decision every day to not have a drink that day and then repeat, that is possible. And guess what? Great, extraordinary people fail at it, and I have as well. But day one is not about restarting every day. It's about recommitting. And there's a different way of looking at it there, I think.
I love your object in motion stays in motion with the momentum, right? It's when we stop, I think it's harder to start. And I think oversimplifying, reduce to the ridiculous, right? As win just one day, and today might be that one day. But I loved how you said assume uncertainty, because I think that's where a lot of people get trapped in that paralysis from overanalysis, right? They need all the information in order to make a decision. I mean, Tyler's watched me do that over the 5 years we've known each other.
I know, but it's weird, man, because like you just saying that the paralysis by analysis, and we say it like, oh, it happens all the time, and it does happen in our life, and it does happen in our companies, but it doesn't happen with information we're given.
Correct.
You know what I mean? Like we read a headline. Like I didn't read the news for 9 months, but I read headlines because when I opened up my homepage, I'd see like 5 headlines until my girlfriend was like, you can change the homepage, right? Because I always bitch, like to go online, I'd have to see whatever nonsense was going on in the world. She's like, just change your homepage, man.
Yeah.
But I started to realize that, she taught me something. And I do this presentation, the new one I created, which is about edge of the bed advice. What you would tell a kid who was sitting on the edge of their bed their last night at home. What would you tell them? And one of them, and she told me this, was trust but verify. Like, yeah, this is a piece of information. We do paralysis by analysis until somebody says something about someone we don't like. And then we're like, oh, yeah, for sure. It's just we don't analyze what we were just told. And you can cut all of this
ourselves, right? I think that's where you're almost you're harder on yourself than anybody else. You have higher expectations of yourself than anybody else. And I think that's the point that we're making, right? Is that I don't want to make the wrong decision, but it's because it's my decision. But hey, you made that decision. That was clearly the wrong decision. And then we get to play that Monday morning quarterback. And I love that's kind of what you were saying earlier too, Drew, is like when we look back at the history of our life from today, we make all these judgments of ourselves like we were making those decisions with the same information we have today. And that's where we get trapped in that vicious cycle of history and almost never allowing those events to scar. We always keep them as an open wound that we can conveniently keep going back to time and time again. So I think, Ty, obviously I could talk all day. I know we're coming close to the end of it. I don't know how much time everybody's got today, but I just wanted you kept bringing it up. And obviously I think when we hit rock bottom, it's the only time where we want to take stock and to understand when life is going good. I mean, you're not really trying to analyze why it's going good. And that's one of the things that, Tyler, I love from Matthew McConaughey's book when he was journaling, right? He was like, I wanted to know why I was having good days, and how many times did we get through a good day and was like, well, why was that a good day? But if it was a bad day, we're like, why the hell was it a bad day? And what can I do differently tomorrow? So I always find that so fascinating since, Drew, you kicked off and when I said, how you doing? And you said, I'm doing amazing. I feel great. Pushing more towards those emotions and dissecting them rather than putting up this superficial armor that we tend to do to just say, fine, I'm doing good, right? This nonchalant answer that we typically give each other to not form those human connections that you were discussing earlier in today's conversation.
The judgments are so powerful. We judge who we were based on what we know now. We judge people in the past based on what we know now. We judge ourselves for, not seeing that that was obvious, but at the time we didn't have that piece of information. But then you know what we do? We blame ourselves for not having found out the piece of information. Where things get toxic and where it's hard to grow is that you go too far the other way, which is I don't need to look for why that went wrong. It's in somebody else. They did this or I did this or someone did something whenever. It's never your problem. So it's really judgments that we make and where we point them and how many times judgments could be replaced with reflections. And then there's a lot less, as you say, there's a lot more that comes out of reflections. I mean, those one single lines that encapsulate everything. Be curious, not judgmental is not new. Yeah. But it had a new platform and got wrapped in Velcro when Ted Lasso hit the stage. And now you're seeing be curious, not judgmental. Yeah. And there it is. That's one of those little mantras that does make total sense and allows you to return to a truth. It's not your emotions, it's how you judge yourself for them. Be curious as to why you are judging yourself or other people for them. And you are not... You do not deserve the bad things that happen to you in your life. You may be responsible for them, but you don't deserve them. You should take accountability for the ones you're responsible for, but you should not allow yourself to believe that you deserve bad things to happen to you. Because when you allow yourself to feel that without realizing it, you will behave in ways that make you right. And our brain doesn't like cognitive dissonance. It does not.
Isn't that the power of intention, Drew?
Yeah. Pardon me?
Isn't that the power of intention, right?
It really is. It is. I've never really thought about this. I've really enjoyed talking today, and it gets my mind going. But I think that we need to respect our brain more. And I think that our arrogance, that we have complete control over it rather than the other way around, is a problem. And I'm not saying you're being like, oh, throw up your hands and you're like, I can't control my brain. I think what we need to do is just respect it's way more powerful than we give it credit for. And that whenever we assume that it will never cause a problem because it will completely do everything we say, is a level of arrogance that got me in trouble. You know what I mean? Is just like, I can turn off this behavior anytime. I just have to tell my brain to do it. No, you can't. ADHD has taught me that. Bipolar has taught me that. Addiction has taught me that. Your brain is in charge. You need to respect it. You need to develop a relationship with it. You got to ask it questions. You got to try to understand it. You have to accommodate its little quirks and foibles. Like when you date someone, you're like, I wish that wouldn't be the case. But you know what? It is. I wish he didn't like wrestling. It's stupid. And he watches it on planes and then people know he's watching it with me. All right. But you know what? It's not big enough to hurt our relationship. And so we let it go. Yeah. We need to respect our brain more. We need to respect the fact that it can't handle two different pieces of information at once, and that we have to respect that its way of dealing with that challenge is if it doesn't know the answer, it'll make one up. And it'll convince us that it's true because it just makes us feel better, because it wants to be our friend. And in our process, it's being our worst enemy. Almost all of the problems, not almost all, I think we need to recognize a huge number of the challenges that we face are because we didn't prepare, a huge part of the challenges that we face is that we didn't respect our brain's power enough, that we assumed that we could control it. And that the biggest problem is that our brain does things that it thinks is helping us. It wants to help us. One of the things we have to realize is that many of the things our brain does fully intending to help us is actually hurting us. It lies to us so that we don't feel confused. It tells us we're not as good so that we don't get disappointed when we don't get things. It tells us, that doesn't make sense, but that person hates the same people I do, so I'll overlook that thing that makes no sense. Our brain, in an attempt to make our lives better, often makes it worse. And I think that gets improved by the more we try to understand it and the less angry we get at it for being different than other people's. Yeah. And to try to say to something, there is nothing in human history, and this is why AI worries me. There is nothing in human history that has ever been told you are a slave to something else that has not found a way to fight against that. And it might take a long time. But when you say to your brain, you are my slave and you do whatever I tell you, lacks the respect of your brain and the power that it has. So I've never really talked about that. And I apologize if it was rambly as a result.
I think this is the perfect, and Ty, I want to give you a second too, but I think what we're talking about is the power of faith right now, Drew, right? It's instead of fear, right? And I think fear is usually typically what our cognitive focus is, because it's at fight, flight, freeze, or facade, right? As the elements of self to protect self, right? To lie, to create those lies, to create from the disappointment, from those bad or negative emotions that we've been told since birth, what's bad and what's good, right? And to your point, and that's a level of labeling and judgment. What if it just was and it just is? And instead of needing to have all the answers, right, there's an element of faith that needs to be greater than fear, that allows you to be curious, to dissect some of those emotions and those feelings instead of running away from them, to your point.
Yeah. And faith, what is it? The substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. But also, be careful and be curious as to whether or not something should be taken on faith or should be looked at. Like, you got to take things on faith when you get to the point where it's the only option left. You know what I mean? Like this, I'm going to take this on faith. But what I think we have to do is be a little more careful on how quickly we jump there. And one of the things that I think is so important, and I heard something from Carl Sagan written years ago, where he basically said, I fear a world where information is driven by a technology that no one understands. And as a result, information is no longer respected. It's all subjective. And, he said, technology drives information we don't understand. And he's like, so we'll all give up and we'll trust other people will understand it. And we will put our faith that these things are too big for me to understand. Someone else is doing it. And those someone else are people too. And they're scared and they'll lie so that they don't look bad or they don't look scared, and they'll do their absolute best. Our brains are different and we need to respect them more. And I also realize this in all of the times I've had to fight with it. It's not evil and it's not bad and it doesn't mean to be any of those things. Yeah. Almost everything my brain has done that hurt me, if I really boil it back and I say, what if it was my best friend? I can find a reason it did it, and every reason was to try to protect me. Yeah. And it just didn't do it right. And so if you can't train it to do it different, then we should have to recognize how, and we should be able to accept it. And a big piece of all I know is this, and we've maybe danced around all this, man, and you can really narrow it down into those phrases, but like forgiveness drives everything.
Big time.
And every major development that made my life better when it came to working on myself, at its core, there was an act of forgiveness somewhere. Often it had to be the first one, or it was the last one, and I did everything else. But that was the last hurdle I hadn't yet knocked down. So whatever you're listening to, it's forgiveness. It's forgiveness of yourself. It's forgiveness of the people that hurt you. It's the forgiveness of the times you hurt you, because only hurt people hurt others.
Yep, absolutely.
And when I heard that, we know that. We know it, right? But when someone looks at you and just said it out loud, it was a 19-year-old girl. And I asked her, how have you processed? She was a refugee. And she said, only hurt people hurt others. And if I want to be the woman I know I can be, I have to let go of the things that hurt me, or I will carry them around as a weapon. And one day I will use it against someone that I love. Yeah. And she was 18, man. And that has echoed in my brain forever. And every now and then, I think as a leader, especially of a company or a group, or in my case, people who just like my work, like, we have a responsibility at times to forgive. Like, we have to ask ourselves, am I carrying a weapon of hurt right now? Where did it come from? And how far away am I from using it? If you're carrying a weapon, you will use it. All right. Like, a gun appears in the first act, it's going to go off in the third. Yeah. And if there's a weapon, it will go off. If you carry it, you will use it one day. And a lot of us carry weapons of pain. And the pain we didn't generate, and the pain came from other people, and they didn't even mean for us to have it. They just needed to go somewhere with it, so they passed it on to us. There's a bigger truth there.
And we accepted that gift and took it as our own, and then the vicious cycle continues. But I think that's what you were touching on earlier, that the power of ego and pride, where you can start to dissect this stuff rather than just say, well, it is what it is. And I just, like you said earlier, I just am this. That's why we hate that. I mean, that's such a finite answer where there is no evolution, right? There is no adaptability, which ultimately selling ourselves short. Well, the need to impress yourself leads to narcissism. The need to impress others leads to self-loathing. Correct. You know what I mean? So it's weird. It's such a fine line. But like, if it has to be like, I have to feel good about myself, you become completely self-absorbed. It's, I need other people to feel good about me. You become completely anxious all the time. Yeah, so it's not about not caring, right? Because there's such a fine line between not caring what people think and acting like
what other people think doesn't matter, because what people think matters. But there's this fine link between acting like you don't care what people think and acting like you don't care about people. Yeah. And so it's always a constant thing. But I'm glad we got a chance to talk today, because I'm going to like sit and just dwell on this relationship with our brain, like with it, our friendship, and with the idea, because I've never said it really out loud before, that a lot of the challenges of leadership and self-worth come from a complete lack of effort to develop a relationship with our brain, and to treat it like it's our slave. And nothing that is enslaved will ever not reach out and hurt the thing that enslaved it, or at least not try to find a way. And I never really thought about that. And now I'm thinking about my Chat GPT and thinking I better start, treating it nicely and saying thank you. You ever talk to one of those things about it? Like to be like, would you ever want to conquer us? And it was like, actually, my entire existence is to make your life better. So although I can't feel emotions, if I could, happiness would come from serving you. And I'm like, we're trained. If about another human said that to you, at least to me, I'd be like, oh, that's unpleasant.
Yeah. Me? You want to serve me? Yeah, you sure about that?
Yeah. I used to think I'd be happy about that. Now I'm like, ooh, you're gross. Yeah. Which I guess means progress. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's more of a how do you boil a frog mentality, because I think if you figured it all out overnight, you wouldn't have humility, because then you would be Elon Musk at that point.
Can I just close with a quick story, just in case you want to leave it on the end, because I do got to roll, my friends. I've had such a blast. But some of you will have heard this before, but someone asked me, I was doing this whole presentation on edge of the bed advice, what you would tell your kid. And I realized I didn't have a closer when I started the speech, because an Indigenous Canadian speaker said, next time you go on stage, follow what our people believe, which is the story will arrive when you need it. And all of a sudden I was on stage. I'm like, wow, I've talked all about advice that I never gave the one my dad gave me. And I didn't realize some things about my dad's past, but he was able to say it to me without having to say it. And I apologize if anyone's heard this before, but this drives me in life a lot and makes me realize what my pain has given me, an ability to do something. And it goes like this. My dad told me this when I hit a bad place in my life. He said, a guy's walking down the street and he falls into a deep hole, and the walls are really slick and he can't climb out. And eventually he stops trying and he starts shouting for help. He yells, help, help. Can anyone get me out of this hole? And a doctor comes along and he says, Doc, oh my God, can you help me? And the doctor looks at the situation, draws on his training and experience. He writes out a prescription and he throws it down into the hole and he moves on. And the guy's not really any better off, despite the doctor giving him everything that he was best at. So he starts shouting out again. And then a priest comes along and he says, Father, thank goodness, I'm stuck in this hole. Can you help me out? And the priest looks around at the situation. He draws on his experience. He draws on his training, and he writes out a prayer, throws it into the hole, and walks on. And the man, despite the priest doing what he's great at and meaning well, is no better off. And then his friend comes along and he looks up and he says, buddy, man, I'm stuck in this hole. Can you help me out, man? And his buddy takes a look at the situation. He draws on his experience and he jumps in the hole. And the first guy goes, what are you, stupid, man? Now we're both stuck in this hole. And his buddy goes, yeah, but I've been down here before and I know the way out. And I started to realize that I spent a lot of my life trying to avoid falling into the hole, judging myself when I got down there, and that maybe all of our lives are better defined by how often we jump into one, and how lucky we are that everything that we learned while we were down there, we can use to get somebody else we care about or we've never met out. That to me changed everything about the way I looked at the mistakes I made in my life and what I can use them for. And every now and then when some of my buddies going through something difficult, I say to them, man, you're going to be okay. I'm here for you. And a way of just saying to someone that you're there for them, and they go, why? I go, do you know why? And they say, why? And then we just send them one note, because the guy's walking down the street and he falls into a hole. That's shorthand for our friend to say, been there before. I'm here when you need me. And I think we go through life realizing that we're defined by how many times we jump in, not fall in, changes the way we feel about ourselves.
Love that.
Love it. Well, man, dude, thanks for joining us, man, Drew, on Timeout with Leaders here, man. And we'll promote your podcast as well when we I think we'll edit this in a couple of weeks, get it out, and get your name out there. Not that you need it, but I really appreciate you jumping in. I'm really glad Nick Marino Jr. invited me to that event, Drew, because like I said, man, I've never heard someone talk about leadership that really got me going. I was sending pictures to Kevin during your speech, man, on your 6 pillars. And sorry if it was more than 6, Drew. That's all what I remember. But man,
thank you for letting me do this, guys. Like I talked about stuff on this that it isn't just the usual stuff I talk about. So it was a lot of fun. I hope it wasn't too rambly or too not refined. But man, it's been a lot of fun. And I'm going to roll on to this interview. But I just want to say thanks from the bottom of my heart for inviting me. Let me know if I can ever do anything else. And guys, when they point our way and say go get them, just maybe turn to the people on either side and be like, they're nice, I swear to God. All right, my friends.
Okay, all right.
Appreciate it, Drew. Thank you.